Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Skip Rutherford, and I'm Dean of the Clinton School of Public Service, and welcome to the first of our spring semester programs. We are delighted to kick off the 2009 series with such a great program. May I please ask that you turn your cell phones and other electronic devices off? Thank you. To introduce our program this afternoon is Clinton School student Adam Penman. Adam is a graduate of Lyon College in Batesville. He is a native Arkansan. He has a very strong interest in international issues and in foreign relations. He's working this semester with the Arkansas Department of Human Services, and he's in the process of planning what he's going to do this summer on his international public service project, which he might even share with us today if he's got it figured out. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Clinton School student Adam Penman.
Good afternoon. In today's global economy, the relationship between Germany and the United States is a vital connection between North America and Europe. As the world's largest exporter, Germany's amount of units exported equals the projected U.S. deficit for 2009. The U.S. is Germany's second largest trading partner at present, and Arkansas is no stranger to this trade relationship. Arkansas's exports to Germany in 2007 totaled over $140 million, with the main trade items being aircraft, electrical machinery, and organic chemicals. Additionally, 13 German companies presently operate in Arkansas, and in 2007, 2 new companies located in Arkansas as well. Most recently, Umarix, the fourth largest airgun manufacturer in the world, announced that it will build a state-of-the-art distribution center, production and quality testing, and a shooting range in Fort Smith. Overseeing this critical relationship between these two countries is Germany's ambassador to the United States, Dr. Klaus Scharioth. Dr. Scharioth was born in Essen in the Ruhr Valley in October 1946, just as Germany was beginning to rebuild from the devastation of World War II. In Europe, he studied law at Bonn, Freiburg, and Geneva. And in the United States, he studied political science, psychology, and sociology at the College of Idaho in Caldwell, Idaho. And he is a graduate of the Fletcher School, where he studied international relations, international law, international economics, and received his PhD. He joined the Foreign Service in 1976, and his first post was in Ecuador at Quito. He also represented Germany's permanent missions to the United Nations and worked with NATO headquarters as director of the private office of the Secretary General. In the German Foreign Ministry, Dr. Scharioth has performed a great variety of roles with a focus on international law and security policy before becoming State Secretary of the German Foreign Office in 2002 and then Ambassador to the United States in October 2006. As ambassador, he has been interviewed by numerous publications in Washington, D.C., including the Washington Diplomat and the Council on Foreign Relations regarding Germany and EU positions on various international issues. On the German Embassy's website, he also maintains an ongoing blog known as the Ambassador's Corner, where Dr. Scharioth comments on developments within the German-American relationship and with German Americans living throughout the United States, along with mentions of his trips around the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Klaus Scharioth.
Thank you very much for that very gracious invitation and for that very gracious introduction also. I'm especially touched that you advertise our website, which I'm grateful for, and I, of course, recommend it to each of you to go there. And it's germany.info, and so please go there. Now, for me, it's a great pleasure and also a great privilege to be here at the Clinton School, not only because I always had wanted to see the Clinton Library and also the Clinton School. I think the whole idea of a school of public service is something I very much appreciate, I very much support, and therefore, thank you, Dean, that you invited me. It's a great pleasure to be here. Today, I would like to say a few words about the challenges ahead of us in the transatlantic relationship. But most of all, I'm looking forward to questions from you. So I will limit my remarks to some 20 minutes, and then I very much hope that we could get into a conversation about what you think is important and what you think are the problems that concern you. My thesis is very simple. My basic thesis is there is almost no problem we cannot solve in the world if Europe and the United States work together. Because we could form the core around which others who would like to join in could come together. And my thesis says that whenever we try to do something alone, and you can imagine what I'm thinking about, then success is difficult, maybe even impossible. But if we do things together, the chances of success are very, very, very good. Why is it so? Because there is not almost a single problem in the world today, and it's a marked change in comparison to times past. There's almost not a single major problem which is not a global problem. And therefore, it needs both our responses, and global problems require global responses. Now, as I don't want to talk for more than 20 minutes, I will just limit myself to the 10 most important challenges. There are many more. There are, I would say, 20, 25, which would deserve the title most important challenge. But let me limit myself to 10, and in detail, I will cover only the first 3. And then we can maybe touch on the others and also any other subject you might wish to raise in the discussion period. What are the 10, in my view, 10 most important problems we are facing today? First, of course, the financial crisis, because it is a global problem now. It originated in America, but it's a global problem, and it needs to be solved, and it needs to be solved together. Second, I would say the problem of climate change, and connected to it, energy independence. I come to that in a minute in detail. Third, and I believe equally important, and not so often in the public eye, but very, very important, is proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, especially of nuclear weapons, nuclear proliferation. I come to that in detail too. Then the other 7, which I will also mention, but will not go into detail, of course, are what some people call terrorism. I rather prefer to say radical or extremist views, because terrorism is a method, and I personally do not believe that we are, as much as the fight is important, I do not believe that we are in a war on terror, because war is different, and every European will tell you that wars which we have experienced so many of are looking very different. But it's a very important issue. It is the fight for the hearts and minds, mostly of the Muslim world, and it is important. We need a combination of reaching out, but also of very close cooperation on the police level. The good news is we are already doing that, and therefore I can be shorter on that one here. Another big problem, and that's my number 5 on the list, is failed states. We used to believe that we shouldn't care much about some states failing. Not many people cared much when people just didn't succeed. And we all learned it the hard way, basically on 9/11, that in today's world, you can't any longer afford to let failing states fail. Because Afghanistan is a very good example where the Taliban, the government at the time, they allowed Al-Qaeda to use their territory as a safe haven. They allowed them to train. They allowed them to prepare for the heinous crimes which took place here in the United States on 9/11. And so we learned it the hard way, that in today's world, you can't allow a failing state to fail, because if you do, they would most certainly allow either terrorists into their country to gain revenue, or organized crime, or drug dealers, or whatever. I could give you a long list of failing states, but I won't do because I want to keep my job, and I don't want to make all those people angry at me. But I can tell you the list is long. The list is long. And we better prepare for working together on helping those states to become working states. Gunnar Myrdal, Swedish economist, wrote a great book in the late 60s where he said the major qualification for a state to succeed is to have a functioning bureaucracy, to have a non-corrupt elite, an elite which sees more than just private gain, who has a goal which is beyond the own career, the own private gain, beyond the own person. I very much agree with that, and it's unfortunately easier said than done, but that's what we have to do in those failing states. We have to get into the effort of training people, of educating an elite which has a goal which is beyond their private goal. And that's what we try to do in Afghanistan, for instance. Germany supported military intervention from the very beginning in October 2001, but we made one important qualification, and it's important to mention that. We said, yes, the Taliban allowed Al-Qaeda to prepare 9/11 there, so we should get rid of the Taliban, we should intervene militarily, but it makes only sense if we accompany the military solution with a political process and with economic reconstruction and also modernization and the training of the elite. And that's why we invited Germany immediately after the military campaign was over. We invited all the major players in Afghanistan to the Petersberg. The Petersberg is a mountain very close to Bonn in Germany. And not only did we invite all the major players of Afghanistan who then decided on the political process, on the Loya Jirga, on electing Karzai, we also invited all the neighboring countries. And we said, we want you to pledge that none of you will exploit the situation in Afghanistan. Now, self-critically, I must say, we also made mistakes. We invited all those people on the mountain. We cut them off from the world because we believed that would help the negotiating process. But we made a huge mistake because we served good wine and good food. And therefore, for 3 weeks, we didn't get anywhere. They just loved it there. They loved it, they enjoyed themselves, they were in a good mood, just the negotiations didn't get anywhere. And I still remember when we got together and we thought about how can we change that? What shall we do? I mean, why don't we get any traction here in these negotiations? And then one of us said, it's the food and the wine. And then we served wine from a country which I will not disclose, again, because I want to keep my job. And we served very simple food. And within a week, we had an agreement, you know? So Afghanistan was very important, and I think continues to be important. But the message I want to convey, military, there is no military solution alone. The Soviets increased the number of soldiers from 50,000 to 80,000 to 100,000. In the end, they had 160,000 there. It didn't do them any good. Everybody hated them. Everybody hated them. And I think we should learn also from the Soviet experience. And of course, we need soldiers there. We need people there to provide security, because without security, there is no reconstruction and there is no development. But also, without reconstruction and without development, there is no security. And so we actually developed a concept which changed the so-called provincial reconstruction teams, which are all over the country and which used to be military institutions. And we said, that doesn't work. We have to have provincial reconstruction teams that are partly military, but also partly civil. And we, Germany, introduced this concept that we have a double-headed provincial reconstruction teams, one military leader and one civilian, and they do everything together. They try to provide security, and they try to provide development and modernization and the training of the civil service and the training of police and the training of the army and all of that. I say that in so much detail because I believe that what we are experiencing in Afghanistan is fairly typical for what we will face also in the future. A failing state, going really bad, and then we have the problem, and it will be a long-term problem, and we will need all the resources we have, military, economic, training of bureaucrats, schooling, better hospitals, because only if the people in Afghanistan believe that they're better off nowadays than they were when the Taliban were in power, do we have a chance to succeed. And I think it also reflects on the image of the West. If we succeed in this controversy with radical Islamists, if we can make Afghanistan a success story, I think this will have a deep impact. But there are many other problems. The Mideast, we can go about that in a discussion. We actually believe that the Mideast problem is the Israel-Palestine problem, is the key problem in the region. And from our point of view, it should have been tackled first. We thought it was much more important than others in the region. And of course, Iran is a huge problem. I come to that when I talk about nuclear proliferation. But also we have still the Balkans. We have problems of trade. And we have also the problem that we need to readjust our international organizations because they were built mostly by the United States in the 1940s. And of course, at the time, they were reflecting the needs which we then had. But the times have changed, and we have to readjust all our international organizations, as important as they are. But you have seen last November when we had the financial crisis beginning and we had the meeting in Washington, that it was not a meeting of the G7 or the G8 which came together, but it was the G20, because times have changed, and nowadays you can't really solve a financial problem without including China. Just give you an example. But also the Security Council of the United Nations, just to take another example, was, if you take the permanent members, that was a perfect choice in 1945. The United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, China, major powers reflecting the situation at the time. But already 2 years later, it was no longer really reflecting the world situation, because when in 1947 India became independent, the question immediately arose, why is China in there and not India? Doesn't really make sense. Problem was, they were not independent. They were still a British colony in 1945, so they couldn't be there. Or in 1945, of course, you couldn't have a black African country because there was basically none. They were all colonies. Africa was mostly colonies, so that you couldn't select an African state. You couldn't select South Africa or any other state as a permanent member. But is it fair to have not a single black, not a single African country as a permanent member? I don't think so. Or take Latin America. At the time, there was a discussion about Brazil becoming a permanent member. In the end, the Soviets didn't want it. They vetoed it. And they got the right to be the first speaker in every General Assembly. I would say a pretty bad deal. I would have taken the permanent seat in the Security Council. But anyhow, it didn't materialize. Or take Japan on Germany. Of course, in 1945, they had just lost the war. They had been the aggressors. And so, of course, it was right not to include them in the, as permanent member of the Security Council. But is it still true more than 60 years later? I don't think so. Nowadays, Japan and Germany together provide almost 30% of the UN budget, and many of the missions of the United Nations are not only financed, but very often also staffed by people from our countries. And Germany and Japan together provide more to the UN budget than all the other permanent members, with the exception of the United States together. And so I think I just take these examples to give you a view that we have to adapt our institutions, and that applies to all institutions. It applies to the Bretton Woods institutions, it applies to the World Bank, to the IMF. They all have to change, but we will need them, because as I said, the problems are global. Now, let me come back to the first three of the problems, which I think are the most important ones. The financial crisis, because it originated as an American problem. It originated with mortgages going bad here in this country. But ever since September 15, when Lehman Brothers went out of business, it became a global crisis. And now, after September 15th, it has affected not only the financial markets all over the world, but also the so-called real economy all over the world. And you will see that the data for October, November, December of last year are totally different from the data in the time, the beginning of the year until September 15th. You have a drop-off in production, you have a drop-off in trade, and the whole world economic system is in danger. Let's not fool ourselves. That's it. The whole world economic system is in danger. Why? Because the financial institutions, which have not been regulated enough, and there is the huge mistake. We have failed in regulation, and because they didn't regulate enough, weren't regulated enough, they failed and they ran very bad risks. And the problem now is that they do not provide credit to each other, but when they do get some money, they put it immediately in their own pocket because they are afraid that otherwise they couldn't survive the next crisis. So it's a huge problem. We have to do two things, and we have to do them internationally. We have to finally regulate the financial markets, and we have to regulate them worldwide. This cannot be a national thing, because if one country regulates the banking sector and the others don't, then, as you know, all those who would like to make an easier profit go to those countries where they're not regulated. What happened before? And so we have to learn from that. We have to regulate it. We have to impose on the whole financial system minimum ratios of, so to speak, liquidity cushions. We have to tell them that they have to have assets which they cannot lend out, and there are quite a few rules. We can go into the discussion to that. There are quite a few rules which we have to impose on them. Unfortunately, the debate has started late. Germany, when we had the G8 presidency not last year, in 2007, we have made probably a not forceful enough proposal. We put a proposal forward for some regulation because we were already concerned at the time about some early signs which disquieted us, but we didn't get anywhere. Others didn't like our proposals, but now I think we have to get serious and we have to regulate the financial markets, and we have to do it all together. But second, we have now also to take care of the real economy, because all our countries, and this is a worldwide phenomenon, all countries have production going down, all countries have trade going down, all countries will lose in the very short future. And therefore, we have to provide stimulus packages. I think we all do. Germany just today, earlier today, the German cabinet passed the biggest stimulus package in our history. It's worth 80 billion euros, which is about $110 billion. If you, I mean, we have a GDP which is a little bit more than 20% of yours. So if you multiply that, it would be equivalent to 500 billion here in the United States. So it's quite sizable. And the idea is that we don't do anything now just to provide for the situation right now. We just advance measures which we otherwise would have taken anyhow, but later. We will spend a lot of money on education, because a country like Germany can't survive if we don't have a very good education. Second, we will try to use it to advance our climate goals and also to enhance energy independence. And third, we will further invest in our infrastructure. And with that, I mean train tracks, I mean also roads, although that's less important than the train tracks. It means schools, it means hospitals, it means also communication lines. So infrastructure is the key to the future. And we also, in addition to that, we have lowered the corporate tax, which used to be 38%. We have lowered it to 29%, because we believe that private enterprise is the key to further development. My second subject, climate change and energy independence. I will be brief, but I will give you the main thesis. The main thesis is that we have to get away from fossil fuels. That's the main thing. We have to get away from fossil fuels. We currently, use up, burn in 1 year, worldwide, as much fossil fuels as it took 1 million years to form. Every year, we use up the fossil fuels which it took 1 million years to form. That means they will end at some point. We won't have fossil fuels at some point. But that's not the only reason why we have to change course. We have also much too huge CO2 emissions worldwide. The world temperature has increased since the beginning of industrialization by more than 1 degree centigrade. And all scientists are pretty sure, or I can tell you how sure, 90% sure, that first, this is man-made, and second, that we have very few years to act, because they say with a certitude of 90% that if we would reach a 2 centigrade degree increase in world temperature, you would have a world disaster. You would have flooding of coastal lines, you would have desertification in the central parts of continents, you would have not enough water, you would have not only starvation, but people would not have enough to drink, and you would get mass migration. So they are absolutely certain that we have very few years to act. Now, some people say, but the UN study, the study everybody agrees on, says this is only with a 90% certitude. Now, I have to ask you, if you will take the plane tomorrow to New York, you are scheduled to go by plane tomorrow to New York, and you are told the night before there's a 90% chance that your plane will crash. My question to you is, will you take it, or will you rather take a train or whatever? I would take the train, by the way. I would not take the plane in that case, and therefore I believe that we should end the debate if this climate change threat is real. It is real. We have very little time, and that's why when Germany had the presidency of the European Union, we convinced the European Union to set 3 goals: to reduce CO2 emissions by 20% by the year 2020, to enhance energy use, the efficiency of energy use by 20% until 2020, and also to increase the share of renewable energy, which currently is at 6%, to 20% also by 2020. Now, this is ambitious. We, Germany, would go further. We actually say we try to enhance efficiency more, and we try to reduce our CO2 emission by 40% by the year 2020, which will be very difficult to achieve, but I think 30% is quite likely that we reach. And now the key is that we cannot succeed if any one of us does this alone. We have to do it all together. And we have to convince the Chinese and the Indians and the Brazilians and everybody else. Problem is, we don't have the slightest chance to do that if Europe and America are not working hand in hand. Only if we agree on common goals, on a common strategy, and we have to do it fast, only then do we have a chance to convince the rest of the world. And that's why I'm very glad and very happy that the incoming administration has pledged to make every effort this year to get the homework done so that the United States can take a leadership role again, also in this field, when you have the very important Copenhagen conference in December 2009, December of this year, where we will have to make the basic decisions to replace Kyoto. Because let's not fool ourselves. Kyoto is running out end of 2012. That is less than 4 years away. Usually, all these agreements need to be ratified, and usually to ratify an international agreement takes about 2.5 years at minimum. So that means that we have to have all the work done by early 2010, by April, May 2010. That's not much time. That's a little bit more than a year, and therefore we are working with full speed. We, Germany, have created the so-called climate bridge. We are working with all states and all communes in the United States to convince them to do certain things together with us. And I'm happy to report that quite a few states have shown an amazing interest, and we have great participation in that, in the kickoff event, which we had in Berlin in September of last year, but also at my embassy in December of last year in Washington. Last point, quick point, because I'm getting to 25 minutes almost, nuclear proliferation. If we are not careful, we will live in a few years in a world where you not have, as currently, 8 nuclear powers, but 20 or 25. And I can tell you, I would hate to see my children or my grandchildren live in a world with 20 or 25 nuclear weapon countries. You probably cannot imagine what it was like to have lived in the Cold War in a Germany where about 12,000 missiles were directed automatically at each given moment at German territory. So we were quite aware of the threat, and we are very grateful that under the leadership of the United States, we could overcome the Cold War. But this danger, which we lived through for more than 40 years, in my view, was nothing compared to what is ahead of us in about 10, 15, at the longest 20 years if we don't act. Because if you have 20 or 25 nuclear weapon countries, some of them failing states, the dangers will be immense. The dangers will be huge, because there will not be a red telephone between those states. And there will not be absolute security about keeping those arms. And can any one of us guarantee that in all of those 20 to 25 states, security would be in such a way that terrorists couldn't get hold of that? I would not be sure. So I believe that in the next years, we have to concentrate our effort on working against nuclear proliferation. We have to do it all together, the nuclear powers and the non-nuclear powers. Germany has, by treaty obligation, given up nuclear weapons because we do not believe that they do serve any purpose in today's world. But I believe that the non-nuclear powers and the nuclear powers need to work together. We have to revitalize some of the agreements, the CTBT treaty, test ban treaty needs to be ratified here in the United States. And I think the United States should take a leading role for the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, which will take place next year. So I think this is a key issue. Maybe we talk more about it and what it means for our policy to Iran in the discussion. I've already gone beyond my limit. Thank you very much for listening. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
We do have time for some questions, so if you raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you so everyone can hear you. In the back, there.
Yes, Ambassador. When President Eisenhower pushed through the interstate highway system in America, I know he was copying the German Autobahn system. He got the whole idea from Germany. If you could change anything about our transportation infrastructure in America today, railroads, highways, public transportation, airports, what would you change in America?
That's a very impolite question because, you see, I will be slightly critical of your country, and I don't hope you hold it against me. But let me start with the good part. I think what Eisenhower did was extremely wise. I think the interstate highway system changed your country dramatically. I think it was really a wise decision and a huge and very successful project. But if I were American, where I would have reacted differently is trains. I find it hard to believe that this country, which has been opened up by trains, this country, which really was the country of trains, you know, the United States of America, many people built their fortune around trains, and that you all gave it up. Starting in the 1930s and 1940s, 1950s, I think more and more passenger trains were abolished. And I'm totally surprised because, you see, as I said in my remarks, I think it's the best way to travel. It has the lowest CO2 emissions. It is highly efficient. It's very comfortable. You can work. You don't have to get in and out all the time. And I don't quite understand why passenger trains have practically disappeared in the United States, or where they have not disappeared. Please don't take that ill. They're in a dismal state. Don't take it ill. I really believe that high-speed trains are, for the future, absolutely essential. For instance, we have between Berlin and Hamburg, we have a train which goes 160 miles an hour and which has cut the traveling time from 4.5 hours to 1 hour 45 minutes. And of course you take the train. Nobody in his sane head would take a car to Hamburg because it takes you twice as long. Even if you take the Autobahn and go 100 miles per hour, you can't beat the train because the train goes 160. And even us crazy Germans don't go 160 on the Autobahn, which you won't believe, but it's a fact. And so I don't quite understand, and I don't quite understand why you have, let's put it positively. I would invest heavily also not only in public long-distance transportation, but also in local transportation. I mean, in cities, I would build more subways, more trams, and all kinds of public transportation, because I think it's very convenient, and it's more comfortable, it's energy efficient, it has much less CO2 emissions. So that would be my advice. But the highway system, I think, is a very good one.
Annie?
Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. I'm a strong advocate for citizen diplomacy. In my experience of watching people who have been connected to our army that have come to Germany from all over where the war was, the people who have been there either on their way or that they're on their way back to America, identify with Germany at a citizen level. Many of us have family members that have fond memories of that experience in Germany. If that is true, how do you see, if you see citizen diplomacy to be utilized just as we use our ambassador role of citizens getting to know each other? When I'm in Washington, D.C., how do I keep my global sensitivity? I go to ambassador role to connect with other countries. And I wondered, what would it be like if we utilized all of the citizens who have come in and out of Germany, either picking up a wounded family member or on their way there to live during their army time? How can we use citizen diplomacy to overcome the conflict that we have with just governmental ambassadors? And no reflection on you as an ambassador.
I hope you don't refer to me. Yeah? No, thank you very much for that question, because I think you touched on one of the key points, because I believe that relations between countries are only as good as the relations between the people in these countries. And that's why I'm so grateful that we had 15 million US soldiers and their dependents between 1945 and 2008 in my country. 15 million. And I can tell you, they are the best ambassadors we have. Because, you see, every year we have an opinion poll made by the embassy, and we can find out that those people who have been to Germany, they have a much better view of my country, I would say also a more knowledgeable view, but also a much better perception. They like Germany much better than those who have never been there. So that's why I'm grateful that those 15 million Americans and all the tourists, the students, and all of them. But to give an answer to your question, you see, this was perceived immediately after the Second World War as one of the key challenges. You see, we had this period of about 350 years of endless war and war and war in Europe. And the idea people came up with is the concept of sister cities. And now practically every German city, town, and village has sister cities in France, in Denmark, in Poland, and also in the United States. I would try to enhance that concept. I would ask you, wherever you come from, go back to your city and find out, do they have a German sister city? If they do, it's good. Then go to your neighboring city. I'm surprised that not all American towns and cities do have that, probably because the need and the obvious benefit was not as clearly visible as it was in the devastated Europe. But you see, for instance, my hometown has, I would say, 12 or 15 sister cities, and all of them have that, and they have that in each different country. Now, the good thing is that every year they visit each other. And they go, and you see, it's not the mayor, it's the people. And you see, and that's what we need. We need, and I totally agree with the essence of what you said, we need people-to-people exchange. We need, you see, to be very, very private. My life changed totally when I came some 40 years ago to a little place in Idaho, Caldwell, Idaho. I'd never heard of it before, and I spent there a year. And I got to know Americans, real Americans, not Americans on the movies or Hollywood or whatever, but living people. And it changed my life forever. And I would say the same for people, Americans who go to Germany and suddenly realize there's more than just one way to do things. You see, I was totally astonished when I first found out about some American habits. Don't want to go into the details, but it was fascinating. And I think the same will be true for young Americans and all Americans who go over to Europe, to Germany. And so I would ask you to push this concept of sister cities.
Bob.
Thank you for being here. You know, in 1980, when oil prices spiked, there was a lot of movement towards forms of alternative energy. Of course, oil prices came down after 1980, and we went back to the same patterns that we've had in the past. This past summer, we've had spikes in oil prices. We've had a tremendous movement, it appears, towards alternative energy. Now oil prices are going back down. What suggestions would you have for the United States government, the United States people, on trying to find a way to bridge between inexpensive oil and expensive alternative forms of energy? And how do we get there?
You see, I think, like always, you need a mixture of sticks and carrots. And now what I say will not be very popular. But I think, now you will be surprised, gas prices in America are too low. I believe they're much too low. You see, at the height of the crisis, we paid in Germany last summer, about $9 for a gallon, which is a lot. But I believe that really straightens your mind. You know, when you pay $9 for a gallon, you think twice about the kind of car you buy. You also are more likely to use mass transit. You are more likely to walk certain distances, which is also not so bad sometimes. And now, I believe that, you see, of course, this is not popular. And German politicians, when they introduced it, they were, of course, very much criticized for too much tax on each liter. On each liter, we have currently 83 cents of tax. That means on a gallon about €2.5. That's about on each gallon, we pay about $4 of tax. But it does two things. It first redirects energy use. You really use it more efficiently if it's expensive. But it also gives you the money to modernize your roads, your highways, to modernize your tracks for the trains, to modernize your infrastructure. And third, it made it even possible that we could put forward in 2000 a quite ambitious, we called it climate change and energy independence package, where we heavily subsidize the use of renewable energy, especially wind and solar, because we first wanted to get away from energy imports from fossil fuels, but we also wanted to decrease CO2 emissions. And we, for instance, guarantee the price when you have a solar roof, for instance. In Germany, you have, for 20 years, you get a guaranteed price for the energy you sell back, the energy you don't use, you produce, but you don't use, and you can have a guaranteed price for 20 years. That means you can exactly calculate, and you can say, oh, after 7 years, it's a net profit. And so I buy a solar roof. And so people do, because we are economic animals in a way. And so, but of course, we need money to do that, and we got it also by the taxes from gas. Not only, but I mean also. And so I would say that I think it's not a bad policy to have a certain amount of tax on gasoline. You also need these incentives, as I mentioned, to use solar energy, to use wind energy, and for some time, the prices in producing solar energy will be higher, but this will go down over time the more you produce. So my advice would be to introduce a higher tax on gasoline, but to make the increase dependent on the price. That means the higher the price rises, the lower I would have the tax. Because I believe now it's a unique time to introduce such a tax because gas prices are relatively low, and I would see to it that that you use the time now to prepare for difficult times, because they will go up again in the future anyhow. And why not try to keep people to stick to the adapted use of energy, which they might have made, the changes they might have made last summer.
One more question, Tina.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Tina, a Clinton School student from China. Nowadays, the natural gas supply dispute between Russia and European countries and Ukraine has become the international concern, which threatens the natural gas supply to several European countries. My question is, how much Germany is relying on the natural gas supply from Russia through Ukraine? And given to the current situation, has Germany considered other sources for the natural gas supply? Thank you.
Key question. We have 37% of our gas imports we get from Russia. This is in the middle of European countries. Some countries, like Bulgaria, import almost 100% of their gas from Russia. So we still are a huge importer of gas because we are a big country. And the question you address is a key one, because we need to do in gas what we have already done, at least in the western part of Europe, in electricity. That means, first of all, we have to link all our nets. This has been done, as I said, in the West also as far as gas is concerned, so that you cannot be blackmailed, that one country cannot be blackmailed, because if you have a linked net, then any particular country cannot be blackmailed. Then maybe all together you could be blackmailed, but it's much more difficult. Second, I think you see here in this case both Russia and Ukraine, they probably thought they had a stronger hand than they actually have. I do not believe that they did themselves something good by what they did, because countries will diversify, and I think they will make these measures, they will link their nets. And for instance, we have already, we have a reserve, a gas reserve which lasts for 90 days. And so it's quite difficult to, or it would take a long time to blackmail a country like Germany. But of course, not everybody is as well prepared as we are. Now, what we need to convince Ukraine and Russia is that they shoot themselves in their own knee. They always say, you depend on us. But that's only half of the truth, because they depend as much on us as we depend on them, because they get their revenue from us. And now when they say, but we could sell it to somebody else, for instance, to your country, to China, it would take 5 years to build those pipelines, and for 5 years they wouldn't have any income. And so I think the threat is not as real as it might be perceived, but still, I think people will decide to act, and I think you see with this crisis the beginning of a European energy policy. That's the result.
Ladies and gentlemen, I told you we had a good first program. Let's give a round of applause for the ambassador. We had a capacity crowd turnout for the first one, standing room only. Thank you. You will notice on your chairs the sheets of the upcoming programs. I would highlight the advanced preview on February 3rd of Bob Woodward, Washington Post, Watergate, inside the White House. Fascinating program coming on at 6 o'clock. I think the ambassador has a presentation that he'd like to make to Terry Garner, the director of the Clinton Presidential Library. Terry?
I would like to give a small present to the Clinton School, and now I'll show it to you. And let me give you the story why I selected that.
Okay.
You see, this shows two great statesmen, President Clinton and Chancellor Helmut Kohl, in 1998 in Sanssouci. And that was the 50 years of the 50-year celebration of the Berlin airlift. And I must say in gratitude that it was a remarkable feat by the United States and her allies to save the liberty of 2.5 million Berliners, just 2.5 years after a horrible war which we, Germany, had begun. So I think it is something which is not self-evident that you would then help the freedom of those who you have just defeated in a war just 3 years later. So we're very, very grateful for that. And that's why I thought this 50 years celebration of the Berlin airlift would be a very good thing. And we, of course, were also grateful that you made it possible for us to reunify our country, and without the United States, we would not have been able to do it. Now, I must add a little detail, which the people in the last rows will not be able to see. Another reason why I selected this thing is that you don't only see big statesmen, but you see also aides. And I don't want to confess who is also in the picture, you might imagine, but you see, this is my way to get into the Clinton Library. You see, as we are also very practical people, Germans, you see, we have something to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Berlin airlift. We have something very practical. You see, there is very little life without beer. And therefore we thought that's a way to thank you, and I would like to give it to the Dean.
Oh, good.
I hope that you do.
Terry can have the picture. I will. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.